My own son looked me straight in the eye and said, "Dad, you either apologize to Melissa's father tonight in front of everybody, or don't expect another $3,000 from me next month." The room went quiet. Even the waitress standing beside our table at Cracker Barrel froze for half a second before setting down the coffee pot. I looked at Ethan, wondering if maybe I'd heard him wrong. "You want me to apologize for telling the truth?" He leaned back in the booth and rubbed both hands across his face. "I'm asking you to do one simple thing." "No," I said. "You're asking me to lie." He sighed like I was the difficult one. "Dad, why do you always make everything harder than it has to be?" That question hit me harder than the threat. Not because it was new, because I'd been hearing some version of it for years. My name's Jack Mercer. I'm 68 years old, and until recently I honestly believed I'd done an okay job raising my son. I taught American history at Lafayette High School in Lexington, Kentucky for almost 38 years. Never got rich, never expected to. I coached debate after school, helped kids apply for scholarships, and spent more Friday nights grading papers than watching football. My wife, Susan, used to joke that I could stretch $20 farther than anyone she'd ever met. She wasn't wrong. We had a simple life, a good one. Then cancer took her 7 years ago. Nothing's ever really felt steady since. Ethan had done well for himself. Real well. He owned a commercial roofing company outside Cincinnati with nearly 50 employees. Nice house. New trucks every couple of years. Country club membership. The kind of success every parent hopes their kid finds. About 4 years ago, he came to me with what sounded like concern. "Dad, you've worked enough," I laughed. "I've been retired 6 months. I mean, really retired." He wanted me to stop substitute teaching, stop tutoring, stop worrying about money. "I'll send you $3,000 every month," he said. "You should enjoy life." I told him absolutely not. He insisted for weeks. Finally, he wore me down. "It'll make me feel better," he kept saying, looking back. That may have been the most expensive free money I've ever accepted. At first, nothing changed. He'd transfer the money on the first of every month. I'd thank him. We'd have dinner once or twice. Everything seemed normal. Then little things started happening. "Dad, could you watch the kids Saturday?" "Of course." "Dad, since I'm helping you out financially, could you come a little earlier?" "Sure." "Dad, could you stay overnight?" "No problem." Eventually, "could you" quietly became "I need you to." Then it became expected. Melissa almost never asked anymore. She assumed. I love my grandchildren. Emma was 11. Luke had just turned 8. I drive 2 hours to see them any day of the week. So I ignored the feeling that I wasn't visiting as their grandfather anymore. I was becoming unpaid help who happened to share DNA. Melissa wasn't openly rude. That would have been easier. She specialized in tiny cuts. "Oh, Jack probably doesn't know how these smart TVs work. I'll explain online banking later. You don't need to worry about the bill." Always smiling, always sounding helpful, always making sure everyone noticed I was the old guy who needed assistance. The worst part? Sometimes I'd catch myself believing her. Then there were her parents, Richard and Linda Collins. Richard had sold an industrial supply company for more money than I could imagine. He reminded people of that fact constantly. If there was a conversation, somehow he'd make it about one of 3 things: his investments, his golf score, or himself. Linda wasn't much different. She could compliment you and insult you in the same sentence. "Jack has such a sweet little house. Little, always little pension, little car, little life." The trouble started at Richard's country club 2 weeks earlier. A group of us had finished lunch after a charity golf tournament. Richard was entertaining everyone with another story. "This shopping center I bought in Florida doubled in value because I predicted where the highway expansion would go." I happened to know that wasn't true. Not because I was trying to embarrass him, because my older brother Thomas had owned property nearby years ago. "I thought the state announced that project after you bought the property," I said. Richard smiled. "No, I'm pretty sure they did." One of the other men looked it up on his phone. Turns out, they had. Richard laughed it off. Everyone else moved on. I thought that was the end of it. Apparently not. 3 nights later, Ethan called. "You owe Richard an apology." "For what?" "You embarrassed him." "He embarrassed himself." "That's not the point." I remember standing in my kitchen staring out the window at the maple tree Susan planted years ago. "Ethan, are you actually hearing yourself?" "It's one dinner, Dad." "No. It's important to Melissa." "No. It's important to me." "Still no." Then his voice changed. Cool. Almost businesslike. If you refuse, I waited. I'm done sending the monthly support. Silence. You'd really do that? I don't want to, but you will. If that's what it takes. I wished he'd yelled. Anger would have hurt less. After we hung up, I sat alone for nearly an hour. Not because of the money. $3,000 is real money. Of course it is. Losing it would mean changes. I'd postpone fixing the roof, drive my old Ford another few years, cancel a vacation I'd been thinking about. None of that bothered me nearly as much as realizing my own son believed my self-respect had a price. The next morning I drove downtown to meet my attorney, Karen Whitfield. I'd expected paperwork. Instead, she stood when I walked into her office. I'm so sorry about your brother. I hadn't even known Thomas was sick. We weren't estranged, just different. He'd spent 40 years building commercial real estate in Scottsdale, Arizona. I stayed in Kentucky teaching history. We talked every month, visited when we could. Neither of us imagined one would outlive the other so suddenly. Karen slid a folder across the desk. He updated his estate 6 months ago. I opened it, then closed it again. I think you've handed me the wrong file. She shook her head. No. Thomas left everything to me? She nodded. The estimated value is approximately $26 million. I honestly laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to process the number. Thomas had never married, never had children, and somehow he'd chosen me. Karen spent the next hour explaining trusts, investment accounts, commercial buildings, tax issues, and more paperwork than I'd ever seen. I barely heard half of it. Before I left, she asked if I told Ethan. No. Are you planning to? I looked out her office window. Not today. Now, less than 24 hours later, I was driving north on I-75 towards Cincinnati. The estate papers sat locked inside my briefcase in the trunk. Nobody at tonight's dinner knew they existed. As far as Ethan was concerned, I was still the retired schoolteacher, depending on his monthly deposit. The sun was beginning to set as I pulled into the Collins family's neighborhood. Big brick homes, perfect lawns, expensive SUVs lined the driveways. I shut off the engine and rested both hands on the steering wheel. I wasn't walking into that house to argue about money. I was walking in to learn exactly how much my dignity was worth to the people who claimed they loved me. By the time I rang the Collins front doorbell, I'd already decided on one thing. I wasn't going to mention Thomas, not unless I absolutely had to. The front door swung open before I could knock a second time. Melissa smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. Jack, you made it. I said I would. She stepped aside. Everyone's in the backyard. The house looked like something out of a home magazine. Hardwood floors polished to a shine. Fresh flowers on every table. Soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. I couldn't help noticing there wasn't a single family photo of Ethan's side of the family anywhere. Plenty of Melissa's parents. Plenty of vacations in Europe. Plenty of the grandchildren. None with Susan. None with me. Maybe that shouldn't have bothered me. It still did. The backyard was full, maybe 25 people. Neighbors, business friends, Melissa's cousins. A few people I recognized from previous holidays. Richard stood by the outdoor kitchen holding a glass of red wine like he owned the whole county. The moment he spotted me, his grin widened. Jack! He stretched both arms out. I wasn't sure you'd come. I don't break my word. No, he chuckled. Just my stories. Several people laughed politely. I smiled. Evening, Richard. He waited, probably expecting me to apologize right there. Instead, I walked past him toward Ethan. My son hugged me. It felt quick, careful, like he was making sure everyone saw him do it. Glad you came, Dad. I almost didn't. He looked over my shoulder toward Richard. I'm hoping tonight goes smoothly. So am I. Neither one of us believed that. Emma came running across the patio before either of us could say another word. Grandpa! She wrapped both arms around me. Now that was real. Hey, Peanut. I got an A on my science project. I knew you would. Luke wasn't far behind. Grandpa, come see my baseball glove. Within 30 seconds, I'd forgotten why I'd come. That's what grandchildren do. For a few wonderful minutes, life felt normal again. Melissa called from across the patio. Kids, let Grandpa settle in first. Emma frowned. But we're just talking. Melissa smiled. Later, honey. The kids walked away. I watched them go. Sometimes adults don't realize children notice everything. Emma looked back twice. She knew something felt off. Dinner wasn't ready yet, so people drifted around the backyard with drinks. I grabbed iced tea. Richard naturally had gathered an audience, and that's why I told my broker timing is everything. Of course he did. I wandered toward the edge of the yard instead. A voice beside me said quietly, "Don't let him get to you." I turned. Kevin, Melissa's younger brother. He wore jeans instead of golf clothes and looked like he'd rather be fixing a truck than attending a family dinner. "Good to see you," I said. "You too." Kevin shrugged toward Richard. "He hasn't stopped talking since noon." "I noticed," he laughed. "I swear he practices speeches in the mirror." That caught me off guard. I laughed too. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had all week. Kevin lowered his voice. "You okay?" "I've been better." "I figured," he glanced toward Ethan. "I don't agree with what's happening tonight." "You know about it?" "Hard not to." That surprised me. "You think it's a bad idea?" "I think making your own father apologize in public is a terrible idea." Before I could answer, someone called Kevin's name. He squeezed my shoulder. "Hang in there." Then he disappeared into the crowd. Dinner was served just after 6. Long tables had been set beneath string lights. Steaks, grilled salmon, corn on the cob, potato salad. More food than 30 people could possibly eat. I found my place card. It sat directly across from Richard. Of course it did. Ethan sat beside Melissa. I sat alone. Interesting choice. For the first 10 minutes, everyone talked about harmless things. Summer travel, college football, gas prices, the Reds. Then Richard found his opening. He looked at me. "So, Jack." I looked up from my baked potato. "Yes." "How's retirement treating you these days?" "It's peaceful." "I imagine it is." He took a sip of wine, especially when somebody else pays the bills. A couple people laughed, not loudly, more the uncomfortable kind. I cut another piece of steak. "Ethan has been generous." Richard nodded. "Very generous." Melissa joined in. "Ethan's always believed in taking care of family." I noticed the wording. Not helping, taking care of. Like I couldn't take care of myself. I set down my fork. "Your husband has helped me, yes." Richard smiled. "That's what successful children are supposed to do." I looked him in the eye. "And respectful children?" Nobody answered. The silence lasted just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Then someone changed the subject. A few minutes later, Linda leaned toward me. "Jack, are you still driving that old Ford?" "Sure am. They've made so many wonderful safety improvements." I smiled. "So I've heard. You really should let Ethan buy you something newer." Before I could answer, Luke shouted from the kids' table that he dropped his hot dog. Conversation shifted again. Lucky timing. As dinner went on, I started noticing something. Ethan barely spoke. He picked at his food, checked his phone, looked toward Richard every few minutes, like he was waiting for instructions. That bothered me more than anything Richard had said. This wasn't the confident young man I'd raised. This was someone trying desperately to keep two worlds from colliding. Dessert arrived, apple pie, cheesecake, coffee. The sun had slipped below the trees, leaving only the patio lights glowing overhead. People relaxed, or at least they pretended to. I knew something was coming. I could feel it. Melissa leaned toward me quietly. "Jack." I looked over. "It doesn't have to get ugly." I agree. "So, maybe after dessert you could just say, 'You're sorry.'" "For what?" "For upsetting Dad." I corrected him. "Sometimes being technically right isn't worth it." I smiled politely. "That's an interesting philosophy." She sighed. "Please don't be stubborn." I almost laughed. She genuinely believed this was about stubbornness. A few minutes later, Ethan leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad." "Yes?" "Don't make me go through with this." I looked at him for several seconds. "Nobody's making you do anything." He looked away first. The grandchildren were chasing fireflies at the far end of the yard. Their laughter floated across the grass. I watched them and wondered what Susan would have done. Probably squeezed my hand under the table. Probably whispered, "You don't owe anyone your dignity." I missed her more in that moment than I had in months. Richard stood. He picked up his wine glass. Then he tapped it gently with a fork. Clink, clink, clink. Every conversation stopped. People turned toward him. He smiled like a man about to give a wedding toast. "I hope everyone will indulge me for just one more minute." I already knew. This wasn't going to be a toast. This was the moment they'd been planning all evening. The chatter disappeared almost instantly. Richard stood at the head of the table with one hand wrapped around his wine glass, smiling like he was hosting an awards banquet instead of a family dinner. "I promise I'll keep this short," he said. A few people chuckled. I noticed Ethan staring down at his plate. Melissa reached over and squeezed his hand. That told me everything. They'd talked about this, planned it, maybe even rehearsed it. Richard cleared his throat. "Family is important." A few heads nodded. "And one thing I've always believed is that families should be able to admit when they're wrong." There it was. Nobody looked at me yet. Nobody had to. The silence pointed in my direction all by itself. Richard finally turned. "Jack, I'd like to give you an opportunity." "An opportunity?" "To clear the air." I folded my napkin and laid it beside my plate. "What exactly are you asking?" "You embarrassed me at the club. I corrected a story in front of my friends." "Because it wasn't true." Richard smiled, but it looked forced now. "Sometimes wisdom means knowing when not to speak." I shrugged. "And sometimes wisdom means not telling stories that can be checked in 30 seconds. A couple people shifted uncomfortably. Kevin looked down, hiding a grin. Richard's smile disappeared. Melissa stood next. "Jack," her voice sounded calm, almost sympathetic. "We don't want this to become a bigger issue than it already is." "I don't either." "Then please apologize." "For telling the truth?" She sighed. "For hurting my father's feelings." I looked around the table. Nobody was eating anymore. Even the kids had stopped talking. Emma was watching from the patio steps. Luke sat beside her with a marshmallow hanging off his roasting stick. Neither child understood the details, but they understood adults were fighting. That bothered me, more than anything. I looked back at Melissa. "I've apologized many times in my life." She nodded hopefully, when I was actually wrong. Her expression hardened. Then Ethan finally stood, slowly, like each inch hurt. He kept his eyes on me. "Dad," I waited. "I asked you not to make this difficult." "I didn't." "You did." He took a long breath. "I've spent years trying to help you." The word help landed harder than I expected. "I've tried to make your retirement easier." "You have." "I've never asked for much in return." I almost interrupted. Almost. Instead, I let him keep talking. "I asked for one thing." He looked around at everyone gathered. "My father-in-law deserves respect." "So do I said quietly. His jaw tightened. "This isn't about you." That sentence settled over the table like cold rain. I don't think Ethan even realized what he'd said, but everyone else did. Kevin looked away. Linda stared at her coffee. Even Richard seemed surprised. Ethan straightened his shoulders. "If you refuse to apologize," he hesitated, "then starting next month, I'm ending the monthly support." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was a sprinkler running somewhere in the distance. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. Not the successful businessman. Not the little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after Little League games. Just the man standing in front of me, waiting to see if money could buy my obedience. I asked one question. "Is that your final decision?" He swallowed. "Yes," I nodded once. "Then go ahead." His eyes blinked. "What?" "Cancel it." "Dad." I said cancel it. "You don't understand." "No," I smiled gently. "You don't." The confidence disappeared from Richard's face. He'd expected an argument, maybe tears, maybe bargaining. Not this. He leaned forward. "So you're refusing?" "I haven't answered your request yet." "You just did." "No." I picked up my water glass and took a slow drink. "I said he could keep his money." Richard frowned. "Then what's your answer?" I looked at him. "My answer comes after one small piece of news." Melissa crossed her arms. "What news?" I turned toward the entire table instead of speaking only to her. "Yesterday morning, I met with my attorney." That caught Ethan's attention immediately. "Attorney?" "My older brother, Thomas, passed away." The atmosphere shifted. Just a little. Several people quietly offered condolences. Linda whispered, "Oh, Jack. I'm so sorry." Richard nodded politely. "My condolences." For a brief moment, the room became human again. The argument faded. Death has a way of doing that. I appreciated those few seconds more than I expected. "Thank you," I said. "It was sudden." Ethan's expression softened. "I didn't know." "I know. I wish you'd told me." "I was going to. I meant that. I really had." Richard cleared his throat. I'm very sorry for your loss. There was genuine kindness in his voice. Maybe the first I'd ever heard from him. Then he added, I hope this doesn't change what we're discussing. There it was. Business again. Always business. I nodded. It changes everything. He frowned. What do you mean? My brother left a will. Melissa looked confused. Okay. And he left me his estate. Richard smiled politely. Well, that's good. I could almost hear what he was thinking. Maybe Thomas had left me a fishing cabin, an old pickup, some savings, enough to ease retirement, nothing more. Richard even lifted his wine glass. I'm glad something positive came out of such a sad situation. I nodded. So am I. Then I added one sentence. The estate is worth approximately $26 million. Nobody reacted, not immediately. It was as if the number refused to enter the room. Melissa blinked. I'm sorry. I inherited my brother's commercial real estate, investment accounts, and other assets. Richard laughed. Not because he found it funny, because he assumed I was joking. 26 million? Approximately. Kevin stared at me. No kidding. No. Ethan's face turned completely white. He knew I never exaggerated numbers. Never. You're serious? I wish Thomas were still alive. I reached into my jacket pocket, slowly, pulled out a folded copy of the attorney's summary Karen had given me that morning. I didn't hand it to anyone. I simply laid it beside my coffee cup. Anyone close enough could see the law firm's letterhead. Richard leaned forward. His smile disappeared. Melissa reached for Ethan's arm. He didn't even notice. Nobody spoke for nearly 15 seconds. It felt much longer. The patio lights buzzed softly overhead. Somewhere across the yard, Luke asked Emma why everyone had stopped talking. Neither child got an answer. I finally broke the silence. So, I looked directly at my son. I believe you were saying something about $3,000. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time all evening, the people who had planned to humiliate me realized they had completely misunderstood the man sitting across the table. Nobody reached for dessert. The apple pie sat untouched in the middle of the table. Richard was the first one to speak. Jack. His voice had changed. It was softer now, careful. I had no idea. I know. I'm sorry about your brother. Thank you. He nodded slowly. No, I'm sorry for everything that's happened tonight. That caught my attention. 10 minutes earlier, he'd wanted me to apologize in front of everyone. Now he was apologizing to me. Amazing what $26 million could do. Melissa found her voice next. Jack, why didn't you tell us? I looked at her. Would it have changed tonight? She hesitated. I just think... No, she stopped talking, because we both knew the answer. It absolutely would have changed tonight. Ethan finally stood up. Dad, can we talk? Just you and me. I could hear the panic underneath his words. Here is fine. I'd rather talk privately. I'm comfortable right here. He glanced around the table. So am I. That wasn't true. He looked miserable. But he'd chosen the audience, not me. Richard cleared his throat. I think perhaps we've all gotten off on the wrong foot. Kevin actually snorted. Not loudly. Just enough for me to hear it. Richard shot him a look. Kevin suddenly became fascinated with his coffee cup. I had to bite the